Welcome back to Anthony's Career Advice. This is part 3 in the interview series, and the question that I'm going to tackle in this video here focuses on salary. Okay, salary is a touchy subject because sometimes we don't know how to talk about how much we're worth or how to convey it, and we either price ourselves too low or too high. And this question can be asked in a number of different ways. Sometimes it's handled right away during a pre-screening telephone call, usually with an HR recruiter, and they ask you a series of questions to get a sense of availability, your background, validate a few things, maybe ask a few behavioral questions, but they really invest some time in asking about salary. And that can be a challenge because that could be the make or break question. When it shouldn't, at least not at this stage, right? But it can be. So there's that point, it happens then. There's the time where it can happen during the interview. And then there's the part where it can only be really introduced if they've decided to make an offer, which then turns into a negotiation. Okay, so if we tackle it from all three of these areas, the first area is during a pre-screening or maybe communicating with the recruiter. They'll sometimes ask what your range is, or they'll sometimes say, give us a specific number. Okay, so in order to do this, you want to be informed. You want to be able to know what is the reasonable range for someone with my years of experience in this field, right? Not just overall work experience, because sometimes things don't transfer over. Like you could have had a 20-year career in one area and then you're doing something radically different because maybe you've decided to change your professional life by choice or out of necessity. They may or may not take that into consideration. So you have to look at what your relevant industry years worth of experience is, because that's what truly matters, right? And you want to kind of give a range, a reasonable range based on that. And you can frame it that way and say, you know what, based on this many years of me doing X and the level of responsibilities that I've had and what I understand to be the typical range for someone at this point of their professional life within this industry and space, I feel that this range is appropriate. You really want to give yourself a buffer of about 10 grand. So on the low end, let's say it's 70,000, and on the high end is, let's say it's 80,000. So that'll tell you that anywhere between there can be considered somewhat reasonable. Then again, where are you starting from is also a consideration, right? So your range is not just your research, but it's also where you are now. So you may be able to massage that a little bit and make your range be the low end is currently what you are making, right? So if let's say the low end of what you're doing is 70, you can still give that range or adjust it a little bit more to kind of make sure that you're doing a bit of a bump. So instead of saying 70 to 80, let's say it's 75 to 85. So that you're, in essence, your possible worst case scenario if they proceed or move forward is a $5,000 bump. That's one way of doing it. While also in that discussion, you want to highlight and say, although this is a range, I want to make sure that we move forward because I am flexible. You stating that you are flexible, whether you are or not, is important. The reason being is you don't want them to stop calling you or not call you because of a number range that you gave them. Say that you're open to negotiate, because in that pre-screening interview, you're not pretty much selling what you're capable of, right? The people who are going to make a decision, the final decision, have yet to meet you. So your goal should always be, what can I say that's reasonable enough for me to get to the point where I'm talking to decision makers? Because if someone really likes you and they think that you're a right fit, then they'll find a way to make your range work for you. That's the truth. So if it's at the pre-screening stage, be careful. Don't price yourself too far low or too high. Think of it from a range, but the point I think that's really important to stress here is saying you're very open to negotiation and understand what the range is. Another way to be able to tackle this is you can flip the question on them and say, you know what, before I answer, is it okay to tell me what your range is? And regardless of what they say their range is, just agree with it, right? So yeah, okay, I think I could work within that range. That's it. You don't need to go into greater detail, even if it's far below, but let's say it is, then that may be enough for you to say, is it worth the effort? It may or may not be. But kind of get yourself to agree with whatever's going to get you closer to an offer, right? Because that's when you truly have the most power, okay? Now, the same kind of approach, typically the same approach can be handled when at the interview, if they ask you a question about a salary range. The difference here is that you'll have more time to talk about why you believe you're worth that. And that's where your stories come in, right? Because ultimately your stories are how your past is relevant to their present with the purposes of providing them with peace of mind or possibly growth, right? Most companies, especially in the private sector, and in some cases the public, I mean, everything revolves around money and budgets, but it's how are your contributions going to help generate business or revenue, or how are your contributions going to help take away costs, right? So in essence, it's saying the value of me getting more means this is how much more you get from my efforts. And that's where answering those questions to the best of your ability help complement why you believe you're worth a certain amount. Okay, and then when we think about, let's say money's never discussed, or it's very briefly discussed, and then it's officially discussed when you're at the offer stage, and they present something to you, and they say, here's the contract that we want you to consider signing, and here are the details around your entire benefits package, and then there's that number, that salary. That's the point where you can say, okay, depending on where I am in my life, and depending on how hard I want to push back, if I'm not happy with the number, will determine how strong I am as a negotiator. So in essence, if you are in a comfortable place where you don't need to accept this offer. What I mean by that is, let's say you're working, or let's say you have some savings, let's say you've created a timetable where you don't actually have to re-enter the workforce. Then you may have the ability to say, no, my range is higher, and you can reiterate the value that you bring. So, to reiterate the points mentioned in my interview, and maybe some points that you didn't get a chance to because some questions weren't asked, you say, here's how investing in me more adds value, right? There's no harm in doing that as a pitch, because you've got to remember, at the end of the day, the money's not coming out of the pocket of the person who's making you the offer, for the most part, right? It's a pool of money that's there. Your job should be, how do I make it hard for them to say no to me? Or better yet, how do I put it in a perspective that if they've got to take it to their superiors to pitch this as an idea, I don't want to leave it in their hands to pitch it for me. I want to be able to kind of be the mouthpiece for them by nudging them with saying, here's why $5,000 or $10,000 more, maybe 15, depending, is a worthwhile investment because of the anticipated or the expected returns that you're going to get, right? Make it easy for them to advocate for you. Because if you think of it from that angle, then you have an ally. And let's say you get it, great. Then you have a really good working relationship with someone who you can say, I trust that if given them with the right direction, they can support me, right? So the problem with this is sometimes it's rigid, right? Let's say they say the number's fixed. We can't budge. Then you have to look at the rest of the compensation package and say, what does the vacation look like, if there's stock benefits or the ability to buy into the company with shares, anything that revolves around the entire compensation package, and see if there's any wiggle room there. Because sometimes benefits and perks, when looking at an offer, kind of get lost, I think, by the wayside, and we just are fixated on money. But you could also possibly negotiate more time, possibly, which could mean if I'm not getting paid, then what's the equivalent of it in time off or in stock options or anything, right? So you want to look at what you can negotiate. And then depending on where you are or how maybe desperate you are, if desperate is the right word, you may have to concede. But if you do, you're pretty much saying, I'm here until one of two things happens. If I'm extremely unhappy here, then I'm going to be actively looking while I'm working, which adds more time, but it's not a fair process in general. So we have to accept that. Or it could be, if I see this as an organization that I can grow, I've got to pay attention to how people grow. Because if I model those behaviors, then I will achieve what I'm looking for. And that could be change in the environment, development, growth, status, title, salary bumps. So we really have to look at salary as not necessarily a win-loss type of situation. Look at it as, I want to get to the point, like with all other questions, to an offer. Second I have an offer, that's when I can negotiate. And then even in the negotiation process, if I'm very rigid, it's because I know I can walk away. But if I have to concede, that's okay. Don't see it as a loss. Look at it as, what can I take from this experience and move forward. If you think of it from that perspective, chances are you'll get a better viewing with this audience. It doesn't guarantee anything, and there's obviously more layers that one can go through. But really focus on what you believe is considered fair and reasonable. That's just slightly above what you're doing as the low end, and then there's usually going to be progression. All right, that's it for today's video. This is a very big topic. I think it's a very important question. Let this register and soak in for a bit. Stay tuned for more videos, and please like, share, subscribe. It's a broken record. I'm going to keep saying it. Get used to it. Take care, everybody.